Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here in this space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Brendan Hansen.
I'm Jake Friedman.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And today we are talking about design problems, but that's not all. We're also going to be talking about ingenious solutions to those problems in games. So we've got a bunch of games we're going to talk about. Some of those games include Just One, El Grande, Seven Wonders Duel, and many more.
Amazing. I want to let everyone know before we get into it that if you are one of our pre-planners who play games along with us, just as part of a little pre-show housekeeping, that Jake and I, we have been busy. We've been building cities in my city, the Reiner Knizia Legacy.
Yeah, I'm hitting them with it early this time.
So we're going to move that up in our queue because I've played the campaign 3 times in full now, and I think more than 40 times I've played the Eternal game. Jake's played the campaign at least 2 times now, right? Is that true?
I have played it once and a half and then a half again.
And a bunch of Eternal games. Amazing.
Yeah.
So we'll put the 2 halves together. So we're really excited to talk about My City. So we're going to move that up in the queue. So we're covering My City probably next week. Then we still have Messina 1347 and The Resistance coming at some point soon for our games.
Great. And one other piece of housekeeping, we had requested in the last episode to help us reach our goal of 30 reviews. And we did say that if we achieve that goal, we would release a bonus episode, which we will answer found questions on Reddit. We're basically going to solve all of Reddit's problems in one foul swoop. And we did it. So thank you all so much for leaving us a review. I just want to give a quick shout out to everybody who did leave us a review since the last episode. And those individuals include Sassier Rabbit, Jamie Stegmeyer, Den Big Thermo, Razor6, Jay Redeye, and Lizzie Fox. So thank you all so much. We have all these reviews in our queue that we will read out over the subsequent X number of episodes, but just know that we really appreciate it, and a bonus episode will be coming soon. But Brendan is going to read out one of those reviews to you now, as we like to do when we get kind things said about us. It makes us feel happy, and we like to share it out with our audience.
So this review is from Dangbig Thermo, and it is titled Shut Up and Sit Down for the Laughs, Decision Space for the Analysis.
Ooh, I like that.
Love it. 5 stars, obviously, off to an excellent start. Okay, here we go. Decision Space is one of my favorite board game podcasts. Their deep dive episodes are excellent. Part review, part strategy guide. They're interested in what makes a game tick. Their coverage of classic games is second to none. Highly recommended. Thank you so much, Dang Big Thermo. That was an awesome review. Jake, one of the amazing things about these reviews is that whenever they come in, especially written reviews, it just brings both of us a lot of joy to hear people's genuine thoughts on the podcast. And this one had me smiling for the better half of an hour. I'm not embarrassed to admit it. It was great. So thank you so much.
An excellent review.
Yeah.
I give this review 10 out of 10.
10 out of 10 for me as well.
Great.
So thank you so much. And yeah, we're really excited that we hit that milestone. We're going to do that bonus episode for y'all, but there can never be too many written reviews of Decision Space on the internet. So we encourage you to do that or tell a friend. And I'll also mention, if you're curious about My City, maybe you played the campaign, or maybe you just want to play the Eternal game, the mode at the end of the game where you can just sort of play. I don't think you even need to play the campaign to play the Eternal game. Just taught it to my aunt. You could do all of that on Board Game Arena. So we kind of wanted to mention that at the start of the show. Okay, now Jake revealed to me before we started recording that he has thoughts on the topic that we're recording that he wants to share with y'all before we get into the topic. So I'm dying and I want to hear it.
Okay, well, all right, we'll get right into it. So what we have here is a list of games that have elegant solutions to problems. And this is my question, right? Is I feel like a lot of these examples, Brendan, I'm grateful that you spent a lot of time and effort coming up with awesome examples for the episode, but I feel like a lot of them are sort of like reverse engineered. You know, you can like find any elegant system in a game and then work back to like what type of problem this solves. So
Mm.
right before we were recording, you're asking me about a recent play of Cyclades that I had, and you're like, well, how about like the auction mechanism? Does that fit in here? And to me, that's just kind of a silly question, because shouldn't we be asking like, what's the problem, right? I feel
Mm.
like, because how is this? That's my question. Turning it back on you is, in what way is this different than just saying like elegant kind of mechanisms, full stop?
I think that's a really interesting question. For me, it's interesting to talk about novel or ingenious mechanisms, yes, but it's even more interesting for me to conjecture on why they exist and how they ended up in a game. Sort of what about the system might have led to the system being implemented in the exact way that it is within a game. That's an interesting exercise, right? To kind of reverse engineer a game and think about why it probably became the game that it became. We can't know for sure in a lot of these cases. That's definitely the case. There's a lot of supposition going on, and I admit
Right.
that with a lot of these, I have not play tested the version of the game that
Nor talk to
exists,
the
nor
designer.
talk
No,
to the designer.
it'd be
Yeah.
one thing if they're like, I wanted to solve this problem, which is why I use this mechanism. That's not what's going on here.
A lot of this is me flexing, and you to also flexing these sort of hypothetical design muscles, right? Thinking about a system in a game, thinking what would happen in the game if you took that system out, what problem would arise, and then kind of reflecting on, oh, wow, that's a really elegant solution because the game without that would just break in X way. And I think that while we're kind of coming at it a backwards way, coming into this episodes, oftentimes while I'm designing games, I come at it from the other direction. I find myself in a position where something is really not working, and I'm trying to rack my brain on how to come up with something ingenious to fix it, and that's really difficult. So this is sort of a fun, I think, candy sort of gobbling episode where we get to do the opposite and see someone else's ingenious solution to a problem that may or may not have existed, but arguably definitely would if you took out the school system.
Interesting. Okay.
Does that
So
justify it? Should we
I,
shut it down? 7
yeah,
minutes
all
in?
right. Yeah. All right. And thank you for listening to this week's episode of Decision Space. You can find us on social media, blah, blah, blah. No, that does make sense to me. I think you have more of like your designer brain muscles, exercise. So I think you're more predisposed to think about games in this way,
Yeah.
where I, come more as like an enjoyer of games. And for me, I think I'm less likely to look at an interesting mechanism and see and the problem beyond that, right? I tend to like,
Sure.
I was looking at your list of games in the notes, and I was looking at my collection, and I was just trying to like see problems there, and I was having a really difficult time of it. Like I can see a lot of like, oh, I love this game for this mechanism, but that was kind of like end of thought. I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
oh,
totally.
Raiders of North Sea, it's got that elegant pick up a worker, place a worker deal. I like that. I mean, that solves some problems, right? Because it's like a really efficient rule. But I didn't feel like that like fit here.
I thought of that mechanism too, and I also agreed that it didn't fit because I feel like the ingenious of that mechanism isn't really solving a problem. It's just, it gives the game amazing pacing.
Yeah. The other
Yeah.
one I was thinking about that I didn't put here was Aeon's End. How
Mm,
when you get like you never shuffle your deck,
yeah.
and I was like, that's cool. That solves this thing where you can like guarantee you get combos, but that's not really like a problem with a
Yeah.
different deck building game. It's more of just like important facet that makes Dominion different from Eon's End and how the deck works.
Sure.
And I like it in Eon's End, but it didn't feel like it was solving a design problem.
Though I haven't played Ian's End, but it does make it much more strategic. So
Yes.
maybe
But that's
Ian's
not
End
really a
is,
problem
it's not a
either.
problem, but
It's just different.
is it long? Isn't it kind of longer?
Yeah, probably like 2 hours.
So see, maybe you want less randomness, so then you end up, I don't know. We don't have to dive into that solution potentially. But I could see how maybe you wouldn't want too much output randomness of your random shuffle compared to a shorter deck builder like Star Realms that you can play in 15 minutes or Dominion. So then you end up with this novel mechanism where you're like, oh, the combos just aren't coming together in your playtest. You're like, how can we fix that? Well, what if you could put the combos together before you put your deck down?
Right. It
Yeah.
fixes the bag builder problem where you could like spend a lot of resource to get
And
a
never
cool
get it.
token in your bag and never get it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's like apples and oranges.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, that's probably enough of the preamble sort of for how we're both kind of coming into this conversation. Brendan, why don't we get started with can we start with like your best example that you came up
Oh
with?
my gosh, that's so much pressure. Let's
Well,
see.
I just want like the clearest,
The
because I
clearest
feel like
example.
potentially through no fault of our own, it's very possible that a listener might be a little bit confused right now.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Let's help him out.
yeah, let's give them a little bit of a soft landing.
I think I want to start with a game by Antoine Bauza and Bruno Cathala called Seven Wonders Duel, which is one of the most popular drafting games of all time. And drafting games are notoriously difficult to balance for two players. It's just something that up until around 5 or maybe 8 years ago, just you didn't see a lot of drafting games for two players. And when Seven Wonders Duel came out, right, it's this two-player version of a multiplayer game. And a lot of the design of that game was wanting to bring over all of the elements that you found in the multiplayer version for the two-player version. So you have the military conflicts, and you have your system of having yellow cards for your economy, and you have these blue buildings that you can build in chains just for victory points. But the other thing is there's these science victory point symbols. And in original Seven Wonders, there's this triangular scoring of these science cards where the more you get, the more points that you're scoring for them. So you want lots of one symbol, or you want sets of one of each of three symbols in the game. And that system gets totally overhauled in the transition from Seven Wonders to Seven Wonders Duel. And I think this was solving a problem within that game of probably over a triangular scoring symbol collection game like that, over centralizing the meta that would have existed, right? It sort of makes the whole game almost about this tug of war about those science symbols, because either I have to take them, or Jake will. And if I just let you keep taking them, you're going to keep getting points and keep getting points. So all of a sudden, every single game becomes about, in some part, taking those science symbols. And then you never really have one person who gets to pursue the science strategic path, while the other person kind of gets to ignore it and see how that goes. Because if it's a triangular scoring system where every time you take a card, you're getting more points no matter what, if I just let you do that, you're just going to win. So
But
that
Brendan,
system
don't you
is a problem.
see that if I just let you take all the science cards in Seven Wonders Duel, you literally win? It's like a win condition.
Yes and no, right? Because
No,
the
wait.
difference becomes,
Yes, right. It is.
yes,
You
literally,
automatically win.
if you take them all. If you
Yeah.
take them all. But if I get them all but one,
Yes.
then we're fine, right?
Yeah.
Then I don't necessarily win the game. So it hasn't totally over centralized, right? Because it's about getting that set of 6 symbols in Seven Wonders Duel. It becomes the set collection game. And there's this other element of getting progress symbols, right? So it adds this tension to the system where, Jake, if we're playing a game of Seven Wonders Duel, maybe I go hard on science, I'm going for the full set, and you're incentivized to just take one of them. It's not that you have to compete for them all the time.
Yeah.
And then also, to make that system a little spicier, now we add this progress system where you get special benefits, so that if I do pursue it and I don't get the full set, maybe I'm not completely out of luck.
Right. And it definitely, I'm having a hard time participating in this conversation because I don't know Seven Wonders. I've never played Seven Wonders in my life somehow.
We
So
need to
like,
fix that.
so it's hard for me to like see the problem, but I
Yeah.
do really enjoy Seven Wonders Duel, that it feels like you're competing in 3 distinct arenas, right? Where it's like science, you're going to try and get all of them. You've got a tug of war military, and then you've got points.
Yeah.
And if science was just like also points, then it does feel like that would be a much less interesting game. I don't know, over centralizing or what. But yeah, I think I hear what you're saying. I don't know if this was your best example, but
I should have had you pick it.
yeah, I should have picked one.
The
I
problem
wanna
for me here,
Yes.
let me just restate it so
Yeah, let's
we
just
can
start
punch
over.
really clearly.
Let's cut all this.
What?
I'm
No.
just kidding.
For me, the problem is, part of the joy of Seven Wonders is that you get to pursue different strategies in different games, right?
Okay.
So some games you're doing this and other games you're doing that. And if science tokens are triangular scoring, like in the original Seven Wonders, in Seven Wonders Duel, there's no framework for you to do that, because you always have to be in the science game. Otherwise, you're pretty much throwing it to your opponent. Or the system gets neutered and it doesn't give points and it shouldn't be there, right?
Yeah. Okay.
To me, this feels ingenious, but maybe it
I
needs
think
too
it's
much
very
context.
cool.
So why don't you take
I want to just I'm sure that our Seven Wonders fans are with you 100%.
I hope so.
But I also wanted to say this conversation reminded me that Board Game Barrage just put out an episode very recently all about Bruno Cathala, sort of deep diving his designs and history, and it was just fantastic.
Yeah,
Did you listen to that?
I did.
Yeah, it was great. Didn't they say that like Cathala basically like sat next to Bowser on a plane, and then Bowser was talking about trying to design Seven Wonders Duel, and they basically just like solved it and
Solved it.
designed it on a plane ride.
I think to Essen. Yeah,
Yeah,
good story.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. They didn't mention Kanagawa though. Ugh,
So
heartbreaking.
yeah, well, that was just a big missed opportunity.
We'll correct it. We'll correct it.
Okay, let's do like a I don't know, maybe like a much better example.
Okay. Put your money where your mouth is.
So this is my example. How about this? My city. We were just talking about it. We're going to cover it soon, but there's a problem in my city. So what you have to know about my city is the way the game works. It's like a polyomino tile placement game, and the way the game works when you each round a card is revealed from a deck that shows the tile that all the players in the game have to place. There's a problem with this, I think, which is that it's perfect information. You know exactly what all tiles are going to come out, and that could create major analysis paralysis or just like the need to, you could literally pre-plan
The entire board.
the entire board. It changes, of course, because I want to put something in the top right corner, and that card got revealed too early. So it's not exactly like that, but I still feel like it creates the need to do that. So that to me is the problem. Too much perfect information, too much clarity in the decision space, too demanding of your players for what is a light family weight game.
So Jake, what's the solution?
So the ingenious solution here is Rhino Kniz decided to put one extra card in the deck that does not show any of the tiles that you will place. Instead, when this card comes up, you flip over a second card, and that tile is removed from the game. Therefore, you no longer have perfect information that all the tiles will be available to you, because until that card comes out, you may be leaving a perfect T block space for your blue T block, but that card could be removed.
I think sometimes within games, there's mechanisms that don't have to be there, but give your players permission to enjoy the game as they will. And I think that this mechanism falls so squarely into that, right? Because so much of the mechanics of My City, this card and the passing mechanism, we'll talk about My City a ton more, obviously very soon in a different episode, but still give so much room for planning. But if you don't want to, this mechanism kind of says, okay, don't worry about it. It'll be fine because you can't perfectly plan anyway. And I think that some of the solutions that we're talking about, part of what take a great game to maybe an exceptional game or a good game to a great game are these sort of mechanisms that give players the freedom to play the game exactly how they want.
It's an interesting one because I think the game would still work without it, but
Totally.
it's almost like a valve that's just like letting a little bit of pressure out of the decision space so that you don't have to cook quite as much in there.
I love also, Jake, when this card's on the bottom of the deck. So it gets down to the final three and you're sort of like, what is it going to be? There's this tense 50-50 for a piece, and then maybe you get to place them all. Feels great. It gives really good variance.
Yeah, I just had one where it was the second to last card, and that was also funny.
Yeah. It's great too because sometimes what piece is taken out can really change the whole shape of the game.
Totally.
I think we don't want to get into spoilers too much, but
did I do it? Is that kind of what you were thinking?
For sure. Yeah,
Dang.
I think that's an awesome answer.
Yes.
Amazing.
What do you give me out of 10?
10.
Let's go.
You always get 10 though.
Yes.
Okay, let's see.
Well, I give you like a 6. So
I will say though, in doing this episode, I said I always give you 10. You don't always give me 10.
I'll give you a 7.
But you got to give me the 7 before we start recording. But one thing I will say, Jake, coming up with my list that I was longer, was it was really hard not to just do Knizia games.
Yeah, right.
I just wanted to do Knizia games over and over and over.
Maybe we could talk about that a little bit because I think that it is so clear in a lot of his designs because Knizia's design ethos is just so clean and so minimal that it's right. If your rule book is a page and there's like one thing that's just like kind of an extra like add-on thing, like you
Yep.
better believe it's there for a very important reason,
Sure.
right? So it helps you like clue into this very thing very easily.
That's a really interesting sort of observation, I feel like, for this episode, is that for Kinesia games, there's like these load-bearing, ingenious decisions, right? Because they're so simple. We talked about how simple designs tend to, the designers in a way, almost have less agency over the game that comes out of it. And he's sort of a master at sort of saying, okay, this is the game that came out of it. What's one rule that will, as simple as possible, address the core problem that arises from this really simple structure and create a really interesting game? So I don't know that I wanted to pivot to this right away, but it's flowing naturally in our conversation. So I want to talk about, actually, I'm going to pivot and we're not going to talk about Tigris Euphrates
Whoa,
right now.
dude, I'm like, you broke my ankles on that one.
We're going to talk about Babylonia.
Oh my God. Whoa.
So Babylonia is one of Kinesia's tile-laying games in which you are laying these different tiles across the board, and there's 3 primary different ways to score points, and they really make up the strategic footprint that you chase through the decision space. So there's city scoring, ziggurat scoring, and farm scoring.
Farmers.
Jake's got it. Hasn't played yet, but he's so ready for the rules teach. I can't wait for the day. So one thing about that is the ziggurats are these pieces where when they're fully surrounded, the player who has the most pieces around them gets to take a special power. So that rule says to the player, sort of what that encourages is, if you play tiles around ziggurats, you will get a special power. So that's good. You want to do it. So what says that I should go to a different ziggurat, right? Like the strategic path there is encircle a ziggurat. So I just place all my pieces around a ziggurat.
Duh.
I finish doing that. And then that sort of area of the board becomes boring. And it's very linear. There's not a strategic wrinkle. It's just clear what you should do. So the rule that gets introduced that I think is ingenious that solves this problem, and the problem is linear strategic paths if this rule doesn't exist, is when you place a piece next to a ziggurat, you score 1 point for every ziggurat on the board that you're already next to. Very clean, very simple, right? So what that means is if I put 2 pieces next to one ziggurat and I'm only next to one, it's worth 2 points. But if I put my first piece next to one and my second piece next to another, all of a sudden that same action is worth 3, and that just scales, right? So it's a really great way to encourage players to spread across the board and create this tension between wanting to finish a ziggurat versus wanting to spread out for get lots of points. And it also means that when you pursue that strategy, you don't always pursue that strategy in the exact same way. So I think as much as we can when we sort of are talking about this ingenious solutions, I think I want to kind of highlight why you might look for that type of ingenious solution. So here it's this beautiful way to kind of take this simple system and have it work in multiple fronts, right? It's multimodal in how players can approach the exact same thing.
Okay, this is working for me now because I had a thought, which is that maybe we could identify some of games that suffer from this problem.
Okay.
Don't have the ingenious solution. And the one that comes to mind now, and this is another spoiler, this is just like spoiler-filled episode, is Messina 1347, which I feel as though in a lot of my plays thus far, and maybe this will change when we get around to recording the episode, is exactly that linear strategic horizon. Like you kind of just go down a path, and then once you're kind of going down, there's nothing pulling you in a different direction. In fact, everything is like pushing you to like keep going that way. And that creates a decision space that I think can start feeling a little bit like stagnant towards like the end of the game. So
kind of rote decisions.
Yeah. Like I wish it had something like that was forcing you to diversify, or at least incentivizing you to diversify on the different strategies in that game a little bit.
Yep, totally.
So good one. 10 out of 10. Yeah. Woo. Okay. I'm going to do the other one that I thought of. And this is a game that we don't often talk about how ingenious it is.
Can I jump in real? I just want to say, I was
taking
shocked
my thunder
to see this in the notes. Shocked.
Well, it's a great example, I think.
Okay, get into
because
it.
I think that the problem that this game solves is a problem that has been around for a really long time until this game hit the scene. And I'm talking about Catan, or the Settlers of Catan, as it was then called.
Mm-hmm.
And that problem is tremendous downtime between turns.
Yep.
And I think that is something that like has plagued board games for a long time. Obviously, there are great games that exist in sort of the like board game, hobby game enthusiast avenue prior to Settlers of Catan coming out. But like myself, the first time I had played Catan and so many others, it was their first sort of experience with it. And the problem I'm talking about is just tremendous downtime between turns, right? That's
Hmm.
why Monopoly is like a pretty big problem in a lot of ways. It's like not only is it a long game, you're not really doing that much
Yeah.
um, while you're waiting to go. Same with like Risk, right? Maybe you get to like incidentally roll some dice or whatever. And then here comes Catan, and Catan, I think, has several great solutions to the downtime between turns. First, we have the fact that everybody gets rewards on every turn, basically. It doesn't matter who rolls the dice if the die results show a number that you're on and get resources from, you get the reward too. So that
Yep.
keeps you engaged at the start of every turn. You really want to see the result of those dice. You're also involved in negotiation on each turn. Like anytime anybody wants to trade, that's something that involves every player. So I think that helps a lot, keeping people engaged around the table. And then the third thing, and this is only something that really might horrify folks listening to this podcast, but there is a up to six player expansion for Settlers of Catan, and it introduces. And I played a lot of six-player Catan in undergrad because we were just so hooked on it. It's like, yeah, more the merrier. And six
Yeah, yeah.
players of Catan. Here's a hot take for you: better than four players Catan, because it has this great rule where you get to build on the player's turn opposite from you.
It's a
It's a
good
great
rule.
rule, right? So you have like a mini turn halfway around the table from your turn. I think other games have implemented this as well. I think that it works that way in. I might be wrong, but I think there's something like this in Concordia Venus team variant,
Hmm.
which I played once, and I think that the new Wingspan expansion that makes it a bigger game, like up to like six players, also has a similar mechanism. So for all those reasons, I think that like reducing downtime on player's turn, I'm perceiving was an obvious design goal here, and I think it's something that succeeded. And I think that might be a big reason why Catan became the global mega hit that it is today.
We don't get to talk about negotiation games very much on the show. I think partially it's a product of how we record the show typically, just how we're prepping. Also, it's a product of the fact that Jake
I was
doesn't
about
like
to just say that.
negotiation
That was going to
games.
be my point.
Yeah. But I think that it's one thing that I love about how it's implemented in Catan is like, if you don't pay attention, then you're just not benefiting, right? It's this, it's a dynamic within the game that encourages players to participate more, which in a family environment, oftentimes for me, the thing that was most frustrating growing up was like, why aren't you paying attention to the game we play? Catan solves it by saying, if you don't pay attention, you will have a worse time at this game. You won't have the same opportunities that other players do. Yeah, it's a good solution.
There are a lot of examples of games that don't do anything to solve this problem to detrimental effect, but it's
Yeah.
definitely something that you see other elegant solutions to as well. Like this is a huge problem in Dead Reckoning, which I played recently, but that has a cool mechanism where like once between turns you get to upgrade one of your cards. So it just gives you something to noodle on while you're waiting. And
Yep.
that I thought that was really fun. So I think this is something that especially long, heavy games perhaps could continue. I think there's room to continue to innovate and make sure that your games are, that should just be a design goal for everything, like engaging to all players at all times.
Yeah, totally. Jake, my cat's screaming at the door. I have to get her. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna call that in. Like if you're hearing cat noises, you're not crazy. I hear them too, but it's fine.
So my next game, we're going to go from Catan to a party game, which I bet y'all didn't think we were going to cover a party game in this ingenious design episode. But I recently walked into a Barnes& and Noble, and sitting on a shelf calling to me was Just One, an ingenious party game.
Wait, let's role play that. Ring, ring, ring.
Hello?
Hi, is this Brendan?
Yeah, it's
This is
me.
Just One.
Great to meet you. I'm going to take you home.
Click. Scene.
Oh no. Where have we ended up? You've played Just One a ton,
Oh
right,
yeah.
Jake? Okay. So I hadn't, and I knew that was a problem that I had to correct, which is not the solution that I'm going to hide
That is an
here.
elegant solution to having not played a game. It's like the one solution.
It's especially just one. If you haven't played just one, solve the problem in your life of not having not played just one. So just one's interesting, right? It's this party game that really wants you to have a high player count. Because the format of just one is that there's one person who's a clue guesser and they don't know what the word they're trying to guess is. And then everyone else at the table is a clue giver. And they're all going to write one word on an easel and turn it around and present all of the words to the clue guesser. And based on all of the words that they're guessing, obviously it can't be the word that you're trying to guess written on your easel. The clue guesser has to guess what the word is, that one word. But there's a rule in just one, which is that if two people give the same answer, they're canceled out and they don't get presented to the other player. So it's a game that benefits from lots of players being at the table because it creates this interesting player psychology around, I think that the most obvious answer is X, so I won't write X down, and it leads to a more interesting, nuanced decision space, right? But to be a feasible product, you have to sometimes make design affordances that create situations where they can work at maybe player counts that wouldn't be exactly ideal, and a player count that would be really hard for just one would be 3 players. Because at 3 players, there's just one guesser and 2 clue givers. You're going to end up with less interesting answers because you know you're less likely to overlap with the other person who's also giving a clue because there's just 2 of you. So the way that just one solves this, and this is just such a simple, that's a problem because the game feels less like the game. The psychological experience of giving clues is less rich. Super simple solution. Have each player give 2 clues. So you each have 2 easels in front of you. You each give 2 clues. And all of a sudden, this game that works better at higher player counts works really well at 3 players. Maybe it doesn't work perfectly, but I think it's a really brilliant way to just kind of preserve the decisions and the feel of the decisions that are going on. And it also adds this higher order thinking of, okay, I know I can write down 2 things. How do my 2 things relate to each other?
Oh, that's
And it
interesting.
adds this texture that might not exist at higher player counts, right? So it adds this little, maybe you lose the dynamics of playing with 5 or 6, but you gain this other little thing. And I like when games can
This
do
is
that.
interesting. This is adding value to me because I just never considered playing this game at 3 players despite owning it because it just seems like
There's
it
probably better
wouldn't
things
work
to do with
well.
your
So
time.
it's awesome that you've had such a good experience playing that. And it actually sounds really fun getting to come
Yeah.
up with 2 clues for each one.
Yeah, I really dug it. It's really neat at 3. I will say at 5,
Yeah,
better. Because when you laugh, it's
that's
louder.
good. This is an interesting one to think of games that have this problem that don't solve it. But that's just
Yeah,
so many games that are just like, yeah, probably don't actually play this at 2, even though it says it on the box, or like don't play it at
totally.
5, even though you technically can.
Yep, where and designers just get forced into put. Yeah, totally. And there's also the thing of in just one, right? The solution doesn't necessarily work for a heavier game because it's effectively asking you to play the game twice. But in just one, you're just writing down a word, so it's pretty
Yeah,
easy. Whereas if we were playing something like Seven Wonders, I don't want to draft 2 hands. Not as much fun,
right.
right? So
Yeah,
it works so well because of the weight of the
yeah.
decision.
Low barrier to playing two-handed, essentially. Yeah, that's
Exactly.
awesome.
Yep.
I want to just shout out to one of our longtime listeners in the Discord, uh, Joe, aka Carcassonne Hater in the Discord. If you know him, he will be at Geekway for the Decision Space meetup. So if you're coming to that or interested in coming to that, please do. Tickets are still available to Geekway. There's no additional ticket for the Decision Space meetup. We'll just be there, hanging out.
Jake's
Brendan and
selling
I
tickets. He
playing
didn't tell
games.
me.
Yeah, yeah. Don't. I'm all the ticketing will go through me. Don't bring that up with Brendan.
Don't tell
Yeah.
Brendan. Yeah.
But anyway, so we're playing this game of just one on Board Game Arena, and we're playing. I didn't know this was possible. A never-ending game. We're just going through like
Oh,
all of the clues or something, like in a
so basically how just one works in real
yeah, it's
life.
like an eternal game of this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and I am the guesser, and the word that I'm supposed to guess is galaxy. Okay, and I
Okay.
got it right because I got some awesome clues by the other players in the game. The clues were Guardians, Quest, Mario, and Milky. So I nailed it. I got
Wow.
Galaxy. One clue got covered up, right? So I thought, how could one clue alone get covered up in this game? Would you believe that the clue that Joe wrote for Galaxy was
Galaxy.
Galaxy.
Yeah. Hero Galaxy. Talk about ingenious.
Yeah.
I'll give Jake the word.
You know, and the crazy thing about that is if that had been revealed, I never would have got it.
That's great. Yeah, because you wouldn't have guessed it.
Yeah.
Because it's in front of you. Oh my gosh. Thanks for letting us chuckle, Joe. That's great.
He can't defend himself. So, and there's no defending yourself. So.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's great.
Okay, so we go on to another one.
Let's do it. What are you picking? Cool. Are you going to take one from my list?
Yeah, because I used up all the clues I could come up with for this episode. So now I'm just picking and choosing out of Brendan's ideas. I'm going to go with one of yours. I'm going to read what you said, and then I'm going to change it a little bit. So the game that we're talking about now is KeyForge.
I knew you were going to take this. Okay, great.
Yeah. So here's the problem as listed in the notes. MTG Magic mana paradigm is fundamentally at odds with algorithmically generated deck game. Not having agency over your mana base in a deck would be a very frustrating experience and would lead to either boring decks with all the same distribution of lands or poorly made decks, too much or too little mana. The solution is the house system, by which I think you mean and are extending that to the fact that you get to pick one house and play all the cards of that house with no mana cost or anything.
Yep.
I think that's a great solution.
Wait. What? You didn't read my last part. Richard Garfield's gift to humankind.
Oh, I thought that was just an editorial comment. I didn't realize that was for the podcast. Anyway, so I think that's a great solution. For me, I think the problem is just like mana in Magic. It's just more simply, it's just the fact that there's a better way of doing card games than having half of your cards roughly be resources that you need to like play your other cards, because that leads to a lot of just say what you want about Magic. It's a genius design. It's a fantastic game. I did a Magic draft a couple weeks ago and had an awesome time with a bunch of friends, but a lot of those games are just non-games because you don't draw any lands or you draw too many lands and you don't get to play the game. That's the problem. And I think it's solved. The solution is the deck system. I don't know that we'd have to even bring in the algorithmically generated decks into it.
Well, I think, okay, will you state the house system and then I'm going to respond to what you said, just for people who maybe are listening to our show who haven't played KeyForge. So I think it's so ingenious. We have to share.
Yeah. Yes. So the house system in KeyForge is your deck is divided into 3 houses. So each house is like a faction. So you have 12 cards of each faction, and then you shuffle them all together, and then you draw your hand, and on your turn, you get to pick one of those 3 houses, and you get to play as many cards as you want from your hand for free, as long as they are of the house that you've selected for your turn. And you can also activate any cards that you have out on the board, creatures or artifacts that have previously been played, as long as they are a part of the same faction as well. And it is just a really fantastic system. We talk a lot about it in our episode on KeyForge way back, that creates tons of tricky dynamic decisions around like, do I choose a house that I can play a lot of cards, or do I choose a house where I can activate a lot of cards, or how can I, get myself unstuck from a situation where I don't have very many of anything to pick. So it's great.
And that was episode 17. So it also makes KeyForge into this sort of hand management game where you're planning your turns now and you're guessing what the board setup will be like on a future turn, trying to shape what house will come into prominence at the right time in the game. But I want to respond to what you're saying, Jake, which I'm going to give the mana system the benefit of the doubt, because I think having played it, it creates this interesting planning, right? In a deck construction game like Magic the Gathering, there's interesting decisions to be had maybe about how much mana do I include if I'm playing draft. Do I, how many lands do I include? Is it 17? Is that the right number?
I totally agree. Interesting in the deck construction part of the game, so not so much in the deck, in the playing part
of the game. So when you go to a game where you're not allowed to construct your deck, if you were going with that existing paradigm, it just doesn't work. And I think that I imagine there could have been an older version of this algorithmically generated deck idea where the lands are just this shining problem where it's like, how do I solve this? Because it's either it it feels terrible to buy a KeyForge deck and have it not be very interesting to play. And that happens sometimes, but it would happen so much more if there were lands in those decks. Like if you algorithmically generated
I
Magic
can't
decks.
imagine that there was ever a
Oh,
prototype of KeyForge with lands in it.
it might have been a mental prototype.
We've
It might have
moved
been a
on.
mental.
We've moved on. Richard
I think
Garfield
he
has
was
moved
designing
on.
KeyForge for like 20 years. But yeah, before the technology supported it. KeyForge is great.
Can you
should listen.
imagine if Richard Garfield came out with a game in 2023 that
With
had
land.
lands in it?
There's ways to do land in
He
interesting
would
ways.
not. He would lose it.
I'm here to defend land. Imagine, okay, we need to move on because I'm just going to talk to you about land for the next 10 minutes and then we're going to lose our audience. They're going to be like, just one, and then you're talking about lands? Okay, Jake, I want to talk about, let's see, what do I want to talk about next? I think I want to talk about, Dominion. Because this is a solution that I think the second I say Dominion out loud in the context of this episode, people are going to know the problem that the decision solves, and they're also going to know the mechanism that I'm talking about. And that's the mechanism is that when you buy Dominion, it's a deck building game where you're building an engine with your deck, and then you're having to at some point buy victory point cards that go into your deck and fundamentally change the way your deck works. So the problem that solves is that, well, there's two, I think. One is that with this sort of positive agency loop of an engine building game, right? The better you do, the better you're going to do in a game like that, because the faster you get your deck online, the faster your deck spits out better hands, and the faster you can buy new cards that will procedurally spit out better hands. So you could have a game like that where within the first few turns, someone has a lucky shuffle, and all of a sudden that lucky shuffle is pushing them forward so fast that they've pretty much won the game on turn 3 or 4. And then all of a sudden that's not interesting as you sit there trying to sort of make decisions around that. So the solution is that to win the game, you have to mess up your engine. Your engine cannot run unmessed with into the end of the game. You have to take these victory point cards that do nothing and are just going to mess up your hands and shuffle them into your deck. And I think that almost all engine building games, unless they're really short, need some wrinkle that forces you to reconsider how your engine works. Or maybe really short isn't the right way to frame it. It could also just be that don't give your engine that much opportunity to run, right? It's more fulfilling if you only get to see it in a certain number of cycles. But in Dominion, it's all about shuffling up. So this solves that core problem of whoever gets ahead early is going to stay ahead and inevitably win, because it forces them to make an interesting decision around how strong their deck is compared to everyone else at the table and when to add those victory point cards into their deck. Brilliant. Every engine building game has to think about how they solve this problem, whether it's with length or with a mechanism like this that forces players to intelligently and offer an interesting decision around destroying their own engine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a great example, and I think it is an example that has a really strong lineage. And thinking of games like Race for the Galaxy and Res Arcana, Tom Lehman games that also do a really good job. And those, it's just that the ending sneaks up on you.
It's a quick game.
Right?
Yep.
So that you can't just build a great engine, because if you just spend your whole time building a great engine, when the game ends, you'll have an awesome engine, but not the points that you need to win.
Yep.
So forcing players to, sacrifice for points is huge in those games. Res Arcana wasn't one we ultimately loved, but that is I think a really strong example of this kind of design principle or solution in practice.
Yeah.
An extreme example of it. Okay. Well, so another one that I wanted to bring up was so a card game. This is an older card game. Actually, it's not on the list, but the problem is that everybody just wants to put all the best, strongest creatures and spells in their deck, and just play with only those.
What game is this?
Oh, it's but the solution is you had, rather than just having all the strongest monsters and spells in one deck, you had to add converted mana cost and lands to the deck, and that way players won't just be able to use only the strongest monsters, Crows and Cloudscapers, you can't just put 4 of those in and play them on turn 1 because now they cost a lot.
God.
And that way
Get off the stage. Wait, so land is the ingenious solution?
That's right. That's where I was
Okay.
going full circle.
The real ingenious solution of magic is just make the creatures suck, and it's all about the spells in the
Yeah.
early days. Yeah,
But
it's
I'm joking, but really it is kind of like
an
to
ingenious
come up with
solution.
that is pretty dang smart.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I think Richard
no.
Garfield, credit tip of the cap.
Yeah, he needs it.
Yeah.
No one, who's giving Richard Garfield any credit these days?
Nobody's giving Richard Garfield any credit at all, and we're here to put an end to that. Shoot, dang it! Oh,
Let
yes,
me do it.
I did remember.
Okay, you have one?
I actually
Okay.
remembered the real example I was going to do.
Good.
Okay, and this is another game that we don't get to talk about a lot on this podcast, but it's a game I absolutely love, and that is Arkham Horror Living Card Game.
Okay.
And I think this has a core problem to cooperative games that comes up all the time, which is like, how do you calibrate difficulty in a game, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think this is a problem that has an easy solution, because a lot of players want their cooperative games to be really difficult, right?
Sure.
Like maybe like you only win
20%
of the time, or even less if you're like a super hard ass. Because then, you don't want to win the first time, right? And you feel like you've really accomplished something when you do win, and you have more gameplays to like explore it, and the wins mean something. Whereas other players are like, which I'm more in this camp, like I just always want to win, if I play a cooperative game and we just like lose, it can be fun if it's like at the end, but it can also be like a little bit disheartening, for the group. It's like, dang, we almost won. So that's and because it's just people fall in different camps, like what can you do? So enter Arkham Horror, which is this game that is supposed to be presenting an incredibly overwhelming odds, right? You're supposed to be fighting against like Cthulhu and forces of unknown and unknowable darkness, right? It wouldn't make sense for this to be a game that's like light and fluffy and you win all the time. It's supposed to be a game where like really bad things are happening to you, and over the course of the campaign you're going to be taking some serious damage. And I think because of the theme, even for somebody like me who wants to be winning more often than not with the cooperative games, you want it to be tough. So I think the ingenious solution here is the fail forward mechanism, which is that no matter what happens in your game, you will always progress to the next scenario.
Yeah.
It's just evaluates how well you succeed, and that might change the way that you enter the next scenario. So if you die, then maybe you take like a scar. That means you have like one less hit point for the rest of the campaign, or maybe your helper dies and now they're unavailable to you, so on and so forth. But you're always advancing. And I think that for me really hits the sweet spot of like, I kind of don't care how hard it is, because I'm just trying to do as good as I can. And then I still get to progress no matter what. I still get some experience points to level up my deck, and I still get to see the continuation of the story. And I think that is the sweet spot for me. I don't know, Arkham Horror is almost assuredly not the first game to do this, but it's my first experience with it, and I think it's one that puts that into practice excellently.
I think that's a brilliant example for this episode, Jake. And there's so many games where I think video games are especially plagued by this, where there's this problem, right? Where you want people to be able to experience. Developers invest so much time and energy into their games that they want people to experience all of them. And the paradigm for in the early days of video games was, we'll just make them really hard so people's purchase of a game feels worth their time as they spend a lot of time playing them. But over time, our access to entertainment and to media has changed, our relationship has. So a solution was, we really want people to experience all the stuff we made. They'll like the game more if they see the later stuff. We'll just make it really easy. That ends up not being as validating. And I think that this is such a nice compromise between the two in a way. I really need to play Arkham Horror, the card game. It's hard for me I know I'll like it if I play it. I just need to play it.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one to recommend, because you could buy like the base box and that'd be fine. That'd be fun, but it just gets so expensive so fast.
Interesting.
And it's just like, it's hard to organize it. Like the setup and teardown is just absurd. There's a lot of downside to it, but it really, when you're in there playing it, it's an incredible game and experience.
Jake, I'm going to do one really quick and then sneak a longer one in. So the first one I want to do is High Society, another Knizia game. The problem is this is an auction game where you're trying to bid on points, and you all have a set amount of money at the start. The problem is the player who spends the most money is most likely to win. The solution is as simple as you can imagine. It's brilliant. The player who spends the most money cannot win. This creates this really interesting psychological storm for the game to exist in, and I think is a really good framework for games that get stuck in this sort of space, right? Where there's this one thing, well, oh, this is the most likely way to pursue victory. Well, what if you just make it so the person who does that the most can't win? If it's a hidden sort of thing, that might be a really valuable solution to the problem of a given game.
Yeah, I love that mechanism, but I feel like it's more of like an ingenious mechanism in search of a problem. I don't think that the person who spends the most money necessarily wins. Like you could easily just like overbid
It's
on
true.
something.
It's
You know
true.
what I
I
mean?
think on average,
I think
that
it's
could be the
more the
case.
solution is it's just like an uninteresting auction game.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair
You know?
too. Yep. Okay, here's the next one I want to do, Jake. Azul. Azul is interesting to me if you're reverse engineering, thinking of a problem that might exist, which is that the player who goes first
I think this is a good one.
always has the most choices, right? Azul is this tile collection game and tile arranging game where you're trying to pick tiles in these 5 different colors and arrange them on your board. And in front of you on the table are these, depending on player count, these different factory tiles that contain tiles of the same piece. So when this game was being designed, that's a really interesting novel setup. But one problem that arises very quickly is, oh, the first player to go in any given round just has the best decisions consistently, right? They have the most options. They're going to have the best arrangement of tiles. So I think the solution that comes out of this is twofold. One, I think that problem is probably what leads to the mechanism where tiles get pushed to the middle and become this central pool where everyone else can later take from that new pool that's a collection of those resources, because it means that there's this interesting push-pull of texture where new options are being created as the game goes on. So you don't have these static rounds. It's brilliant. Any drafting game should kind of have a way to address this problem of whomever goes first is going to have the best options in drafting from this open tableau, right? If you can add a mechanism that mixes that up and says maybe not so, that's going to be great. And then even more brilliantly, it adds this first player token. So the first player to take from the center also gets to be the first the next round, which it turns out being first in any given round is still really good in Azul. And then they triple down on the ingenious and make that give you have a slight negative in potential points for taking that first player tile. So it adds a little bit of pressure of maybe you don't want to take it first because you're going to get negative points. And if you get a ton of negative points that round, instead of maybe it being worth 1 negative, all of a sudden instead it hurts you to the degree of like -5 points or something. And that could be really negative.
I like this example a lot. I think it is kind of another general example, which is the problem of unbalanced first player, right?
Yeah,
And there's
turns,
a lot of different solutions for it across the board gaming hobby. I'm really like the way it's handled in Five Tribes, which it has an auction for turn order at the
Sure.
start of each round, which is a classic. But it lets the person who bid the lowest in the previous round is like the first person to bid, and then nobody can bid that same amount. So you have a lot of power being the last person to bid to sort of like pick your spot, be like, I think this is this is how much value is out there. So I can bid 12 or whatever, or 9. And then if anybody wants, they either have to let me go first to get that value or overpay for it. And that's
Yeah.
such a fun decision to think through. So yeah, that's another Bruno Cathala mention on this list as well.
A regular Kinesia himself.
Yeah,
Jake, should we do how many more should we do? Should we do 2 more? 3 more?
let's do it. I mean, we can do as many as you want, man. If you think
Okay.
these are like good,
I think there's some good ones. There's some quick ones.
okay.
Do you want to do one now? Or should I just keep going? Just run
You
through
keep
this
going.
list.
There. You keep going, and I'll chime in as necessary.
Okay, these next 2 are kind of paired. So there's this problem potentially in card games that is when you're dealt a random hand of cards from a shared deck, the hand of cards you're dealt isn't always going to be equally balanced. Card games can solve this in many different ways, right? One solution might be it's a late card game and it's quick. That's fine. I understand it's an inherently random game, but maybe that doesn't fit the game that you're creating quite right. I think each of these cases that was right. For slightly different reasons, and they found ways to solve it. So my first example is air, land, and sea. Air, Land, and Sea is a very small deck game. There's 18 cards shared by each player that range in value, and you're trying to build these collections of cards at 3 locations to win them. And because you're both drawing from this small deck of cards with just 18 cards, there is the potential that one player just gets dealt a strictly better hand, which feels unfair when you're on the other side of the table. That's a problem. So how does the game designer solve it? You introduce this retreat mechanism where instead of just playing individual rounds, you're playing a series of rounds. And when you know you're losing a hand, the earlier you retreat, the less points you lose for losing that round. So essentially, it gives you a way to turn a bad hand into a slightly less bad hand by just knowing that it's a bad hand, by sussing out that it's better to fight another day. It's sort of thematic and interesting based on the theme. And it's just an ingenious solution to that problem of we're drawing from this simple shared deck, but my hand sucks and yours is great.
Totally.
Great. Let's go on.
I've got another solution to that problem.
Okay, great. What is
which
it?
Which is Cat in the Box, which I just played. And this is the same solution that's in countless trick-taking games, which is that you get to bid a number of tricks.
Yes.
That you're going to win. I love that. I think that's such an elegant solution for unequal hands. Like, I think I'm only going to be able to win 1 or 0 tricks this hand based on what I have. And I think that works great.
I love that you're bringing that up, Jake, because it's so true that the retreat mechanism in Air, Land, and Sea is a different side of the same coin as, I had never realized this, as bidding for tricks, which it's the same exact design trick.
It's the same problem.
It's the same problem.
Solutions.
But it's kind of the same solution because at its
solution.
core, the solution is ask players to evaluate the strength of their position and reward them for evaluating it correctly.
I think the trick bidding is almost more rewarding.
It is more rewarding.
Because you still lose if you retreat. You're like, you can feel like I did the best I could have with this hand.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't feel like you won. Where you kind of feel like that if you bid 1 trick and you're right.
I almost feel this is like untapped design space because we so often see this mechanism of evaluation of your position within card games, but we don't necessarily see it. It might be really interesting in like a dudes on a map game where you're randomly dealt a set of troops. You know,
I think this is really good. Yeah,
doesn't that seem like a cool?
Or like even something that like shifts the balance from like the evaluation being like the small part and then the big part like is playing it out.
Yeah,
I don't know how that would work, but almost in like the way Beyond the Sun made like the check tree the big part and like the space exploring the small part.
Yeah.
I want to see like a trick taking game or something where it's like the evaluation
is the big part. Yeah,
that would be cool.
In that dudes on a map game that I was talking about, it could almost be an auto battler too, where like you see the consequences of what happens and you're trying to evaluate your matchup. Okay, we're going to talk more about that one. I want to talk about how a different game solves the same problem, which is arguably maybe less a problem in this game. And this game is Scout. Scout's this really cool climbing game in which you're trying to get rid of cards in your hand, but in Scout you can't reorder your hands, so the hand you're dealt, the order of them really matters. And it could be really frustrating. It can be really frustrating to play Scout with a very bad hand where you don't have many interesting decisions of where you're going to shed cards to create new pairings of cards and see your path through the game. Some hands you get dealt in that game just suck. And that's a problem for that game. So the ingenious solution is that all cards in Scout are double-sided, and you can simply flip your hand over at the start of each round. So whenever you're dealt a hand in Scout, you're actually dealt 2 hands, and you get to choose which one you play. Brilliant design decision.
I think this is even better than you're giving it credit for. It definitely is a solution to the problem of unbalanced hand. It also solves the problem of giving players like a mulligan in games. Because you couldn't do that.
The upkeep problem.
You couldn't do that in Scout anyway because it's like a shared deck of cards. But exactly, it's giving people a mulligan without the downtime of having to like shuffle up and redraw. I think that is like in and of itself is amazing. Obviously, it wouldn't work in a card game like Magic or KeyForge because you can't just flip over your cards or whatever. But there, I mean, a mulligan that takes 0 time to implement is really, really great design work. So
the things of great games are made of. Yeah, it's so good. Okay, this next one, we're going back to Bruno Cathalaland with Kanagawa. Kanagawa is sort of like...
Cathala takes the lead.
Kanagawa is basically, it takes the Coloretto mechanism of filling these rows with cards, and it adds a slight twist to it, which is that players aren't choosing where they go, and some of them are hidden information. But it uses that as a tableau building low interaction drafting game setup that makes for really interesting decisions, and there's overlaid puzzles within that game. But within that sort of tableau building game, you're trying to pursue these shared goals. And some of them are sort of things like have 5 trees, or have a lot of trees is essentially the overlay of the goal, or get X number of a certain type of person. And one problem that would arise from something like that is that whoever gets ahead on progress towards any given goal is going to be the most likely to complete it, right? If Jake starts the game and just picks up 2 trees, he's going to be the most likely person to get to have the most trees goal because he already has 2 trees. So it disincentivizes me from getting trees because I know Jake's already pursuing them. All of a sudden, a game that's about doing our own thing to some extent really starts to feel like doing something by ourselves in a shared space. So the way that Kanagawa brilliantly solves this, ingeniously solves this, is that the goals, the objectives in this game are tiered. All of a sudden, there's a goal where it's have 3 trees, have 5 trees, have 7 trees. And Jake, who gets ahead, has to decide when he gets to the 3 tree finish line, does he want to take the 3 tree goal and have that be the last tree goal he can take? Or does he want to push further and maybe go for 5? And then when he gets to 5, same decision. Does he want to take that and cash out? Or does he want to push even further and go for 7? And I think it's a really interesting way to design goals within a game that creates interaction. It's forcing me to look over at other players' tableaus. It changes what cards I might take based on what comes out in that shared draft. And it also it gamifies the objectives themselves, right? Where all of a sudden I could have hubris, and it's just great. I love this mechanism so much.
It's such a fun decision that you get out of it too, about whether to take the goal that you've achieved or go on. Because if you go on,
you could miss it.
Don't get that, you can never go back and say, like, actually, I do want the 3 tree one. Thank you. It's like too late. You miss your one chance of getting it. So I think this is a great example. In Kanagawa's, like, it was our first game we covered on this podcast. It's a game that more people should absolutely play. It just rocks. But the other thing that this also achieves, in addition to that, is what we were talking about before with Babylonia. It also gives you incentivizes pursuing different strategies because you can only go so high on any given path.
Yeah.
And because you're not disincentivized for going into something somebody else already is. So I think, it doesn't maybe strongly encourage the diversification, but it at least enables those paths. And you will have to diversify somewhat in the game, right, to get multiple objectives, because none of them are like that hard to achieve.
Right.
So at least the first level of it. So yeah, I think it does that. I think it solves multiple problems very well.
It also ensures in a way, Jake, that the climax of the game is exciting because it makes it such that, right, if you just got the objective early on, okay, I accomplished it. And if you could go back, there's not a huge reason why there would be tension. But the fact that you have to pass up on an objective to get to the higher scoring ones means that later on in the game, there's going to be a more tense setting for each player where they're pursuing these more rewarding objectives. So it just makes the end of every game more exciting than would probably be without them. Okay. One of the ones that I have down is just the math is really good. Does that count, Jake?
What?
The math is well designed. That's the solution of El Grande.
Oh, I don't know.
Let's do it.
You have to explain. You have to
now I have to explain it. Okay,
I don't understand what you're talking about.
El Grande is this area control game that is brilliant. Jake and I both adore this game. Came out in 1996. It's one of the oldest games that I own, that I play regularly, and it's this game of trying to control territories on the board, but also a hand management game around playing these power cards that select how many cubes you have in your supply that you could put on the board, or at odds with who gets to pick these strong action cards that are out on the table. And the player who plays the action cards that are high value, the power cards that let you pick those actions, those are the ones that give you fewer people to put out on the map. So there's this really good core tension. And each player goes around the table and plays one of these cards. And if there is the opportunity to have a tie, that could be really messy to adjudicate and solve in an unclean way. So if you had all players play their cards simultaneously, maybe there's some tiebreaker rule that feels really unfulfilling, even though you're sort of solving the problem of all players playing their cards at the same time. It speeds the game up. So the solution is everyone's going to play their cards sequentially, and there will never be ties. because the way that they ensure there will never be ties is the deck of cards you have is mathematically designed such that every player at the table will always have an option of another card that they can play, because the deck's big enough that you'll still have an option in your hand that other players haven't already played. I think that mathematically works out. They could be wrong, but it's something like in 99.99% of situations or something, that's true, if it's not always true. And if it's
I've
not always
certainly never
true,
encountered that
a tie.
in a game of El
Yeah.
Grande.
Yeah. And I think that's a really beautiful, simple, ingenious solution to a problem that could exist, which is that ties suck. We don't want them in our game. Okay, we'll make it such that they're impossible or very, very difficult to have. And then you never feel it. You don't even think about it. Okay, well, let's finish this off with one final game. What do you think?
Final game. Finish
Final
strong.
game.
Finish strong.
We're going back to Knizia. It's Tigris and Euphrates.
That creates a tie.
We'll do a shootout at the end of the episode.
We'll do a shootout. Okay.
I'll go get my Knizia games. You get your Cthulhu games, and then we'll throw them. Okay. But anyway, Tigris and Euphrates, brilliant game, tiling game where there's this war system where tiles come out where kingdoms that players control become combined, and some tiles are taken off the board, but there's a potential for these kingdoms that start off as fairly discrete, there's multiple on the board, to really combine and to snowball into these mega kingdoms where whomever ends up in those positions has the most tiles of a given color on their board, which allows them to then start wars with smaller kingdoms and get even more tiles of that type. So there's this light potential for snowballing with the war system in that game that makes it easier for players who are already ahead on a given color to get further ahead. So if the scoring, this is like the most classic potential ingenious solution, so that's why we saved it for last. So that means if a player got ahead, say on red, they could score 12 points, 15 points, 18 points, 22 red points very easily, very quickly. And that's a problem if you just win by having the most red tokens. But the ingenious solution is that there's 4 colors that you're pursuing, and your score is...
Wait. Take your time with this. This is going to really knock people's socks off. Just go slow.
Okay. So there's 4 tiles in the game, 4 colors. You're trying to score points.
Red, blue, green, black.
You want to get them scored as equally as possible.
What?
Because your points are equal to the color you have the least.
Oh, man.
That's ingenious.
That's crazy. No, you're totally right, though. I mean, that is like, it's like almost like we're making fun of it because it's something that's brought up a lot. And people just call it like Knizia scoring in games where... they have this, right, where you score your lowest valued point. But the reason we have that term and the reason why this exists is because it's a clear design problem that comes up a lot, right? When if you have an over centralizing one thing and that's dominating the strategy in the game, what an elegant way to solve that problem.
In 1997, I wish I could go back and see people's reactions to this rule. I don't know. I could even go back to 2014 when I first played it and see my own reaction again, and I would be thrilled because
to go back to 1941 and see Citizen Kane in theaters.
I can't. You need to stop. Citizen Kane. This is such slander. I'm turning red. It's not even my favorite movie. I only watched it a few times in high school.
Yeah. I don't know. Every time you start extolling the virtues of Tigris Euphrates, that just goes right into my head.
Oh, well, okay, Jake, what do you think? What's the, out of 10, where do we end up with the episode?
Okay, well, you know what? I think we should pat ourselves on the back.
Okay.
And I think this is like, I don't know, it's like a 9.
We had a lot of fun.
We had fun. We laughed. We laughed at Joe. That was when we laughed.
Wait, what are your thoughts on, this just ended out strong note, Cyclades.
Okay. Cyclades.
What do you think?
I played Cyclades. We didn't play all the rules right. That was the main problem with giving my full review. Okay. So our game had not a lot of fighting in it.
Okay.
We kind of like all were sort of holed up in our own areas. There's a little bit, but not so much. And that was because we made a pretty significant rules mistake about, like, we thought the monsters you could get in the game just stayed out like they do in Blood Rage, but really they're only supposed to last like only one turn. So there's like a monster. It's like, you can't like invade this island.
The most perilous world. Yeah.
And then the other one's like, you can't have like your armies depart from the island. So it's like everything was just kind of like stuck
So
there.
would you play it again?
I would definitely play again. I think it was despite that, like I still think I got a good sense of what the game is. I really like the auction mechanism. It's really interesting to have like a territory control game where it's like the big part is the auction.
Yeah.
That was cool. I think I liked it the most out of Inish, Kemet, and Cyclades, but I've only played all of those games exactly once each. So I'm not really
Interesting.
going off a lot. But yeah, I liked it. I mean, I thought it was pretty cool. Definitely would try it again, with the right rules. Still not
Nice.
my like number one favorite type of game,
Yeah.
but it was cool. It was like a solid 7, 8 out of 10.
That's pretty good for a genre you don't like.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah.
I think it's a good, Bruno Cathala. That guy knows his
His
board
stuff.
games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, this was
Cool.
our episode on ingenious design solutions to big problems in games.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of Decision Space. We'll see you all next week. As always, we want to thank Hembry for our intro and outro song, Reach Out, and I hope you all have a great week. Bye.
Bye all.
Closer now, 'cause I am reaching out. Let's look it up. Hold me closer now, 'cause I am reaching out. Hold me closer now, 'cause I am reaching out. Let's look it up. What are you talking about? Let's look it up.
Nice. That was fun.
Uh-oh.
We're still recording.
Failed
This
to
is-
stop recording.
This is the episode that never ends.
Oh no.
Is it really going to not let us?
I don't know. It said failed
User
to
is
stop.
experiencing some connection issues, but recording is being saved locally, is what it says for you.
It says unable to contact the server. You may experience connection issues. Wait a moment, and if the problem persists, try refreshing the page and then try stopping recording. I'm gonna try that.
Okay.
It says changes may not be saved when I click refresh. It's gonna be okay though, right?